Welcome to the Mortification of Spin, a podcast which comes out under the auspices of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. I'm your host, Trueman, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Todd Pruitt. Todd.
Yes.
Any news?
Any news? Well, you and I were talking the other day about your taste in music. Whenever there's a conversation with you, music inevitably comes up. Now, you and your wife just recently attended a concert by some old English guy who plays the guitar, right?
It was a couple of years ago. It was Mark Knopfler, actually.
A couple of years ago.
Mark Knopfler is impressive because he has aged as I have aged.
Not well? Is that the...
Well, he's kind of bald and a bit overweight now as well. But what I like about Mark Knopfler is that unlike certain bands out there, not thinking particularly of the Rolling Stones, but unlike certain bands out there, Mark Knopfler has kind of slowed down as he's got older. He can still put together a blazing guitar solo.
Yes.
But his music has slowed as he slowed, and his latest album, Privateering, I don't think, it's a double album. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's a weak track on it anywhere. Yeah. Quite superb.
Well, this is what I like about guys like Mark Knopfler, what I like about men like Aaron Cohen and some other aging guys who have been making music for a long time, is they seem to be okay with the fact that they're aging. They know it's not the late 60s anymore. And this is my problem with the Rolling Stones, other than the fact that I think, and Carl, maybe this will offend you, I think that the Rolling Stones have always been an overrated band. That's just me.
That does offend me, but carry on.
It's okay. I think they've always been overrated. However, there's something about seeing Mark Knopfler, or to a certain extent also Eric Clapton, still doing some things that I think are new and fresh and relevant for where they are in their stage in life. I can say that about Robert Plant. This album he did with Alison Krauss a few years ago. It's fantastic. But the Rolling Stones, to see those guys still prancing around singing Satisfaction. There's a problem with that, Carl. Come on, these guys are having tea with the Queen, and they're still, singing "I Can't."
As I said some years ago, their tours are now sellouts in every sense of the word. That actually brings us by a very contrived avenue to today's topic. I want to talk about the birth of the cool. Another one of my musical interests, I haven't listened to him for some years now, Miles Davis.
Yes.
Miles Davis in the late 40s put together a great album, The Birth of the Cool, which changed the face of jazz. Birth of the Cool highlights the importance of this nebulous thing, cool, to culture. And we now live at a time certainly in America, where Christianity, certainly in terms of its subculture, has gained a certain cool. I've been Reformed, I've been a Calvinist since the day in my first year at university 300 years ago when I read J.I. Packer's book, God's Words. And I remember running across St. Catherine's College to speak to a friend about what I'd read, that the Packer's treatment of election there opened the Bible for me. Right. I became a Calvinist at that moment. I became Reformed a little bit later on. Unlike the skinny jean brigade out there, I make a distinction between being merely Calvinist and actually being Reformed. I became Reformed sometime later on. But what was interesting was that meant that I was not cool, even in Christian circles. Right. Up until about 5 years ago, where suddenly it was too late for me to be cool anyway. I no longer fitted into those skinny jeans. Yes. My wife did say to me the other day, you're always trashing people in skinny jeans, but you used to wear them. And I said, yeah, I used to wear them. I hate the fact that other people still can wear them. And that's why I object to them so strongly.
Sure.
But suddenly, Calvinistic theology becomes cool.
Right.
5 or 6 years ago, maybe as a result of Collin Hansen's book, Young, Restless and Reformed. Maybe Collin Hansen was merely describing something that was already taking place, perhaps as a combination of the two. But suddenly, Calvinism is kind of cool.
Right.
It starts to get write-ups in broadsheet newspapers. We have hip, or they were at the time young, they're now really middle-aged pastors like Mark Driscoll coming through and making a big splash culturally. And a lot of people start to jump on the bandwagon.
Right.
And given that I'm a miserable middle-aged cynic, alarm bells start to go in my mind about, is the Calvinist revival true because it's true?
Right.
Or is it true because it's cool?
Right.
Is it coolvinism? Hey, that's a really
Hey,
bad,
I like that.
That's a really bad pun.
That's
I was reading something recently that puns are usually done by people with deep psychological flaws. So there you are. Is Calvinism really coolvinism?
Yeah.
Let's drop that.
I have the same question and the same concern about the Young Restless Reform movement. I would certainly fit the description of a guy who was a young first-time senior pastor who went through a theological crisis of having to decide if I was going to believe some of the sentimental notions of God that I was raised on, and not to criticize what I was raised in, but it was not until I began reading, as you mentioned, J.I. Packer, that I was being exposed to some notions about God that I really hadn't heard explained to me before. And the problem was I was seeing it in the Bible, and I was running out of things to preach because I didn't want to preach that. And all I can say is it was like a second conversion experience where I bowed the knee to that truth. And incidentally, Packer's book that Carl mentioned is still in print, very much readable and highly recommended. That all said, I have the same concern about the Young Restless Reform movement, is that for a while it seemed rebellious, it seemed sensational, it seemed subversive. And I think by virtue of that, it may have drawn a lot of young people to it for those reasons, rather than because of clear doctrinal conviction, but because it seemed like the hip thing to do. There were a lot of cool Calvinists. And I sense in some of the things I'm reading that the excitement over that is beginning to wane precisely because it's not subversive anymore.
Yeah, the old radicals become the new establishment.
Right.
It's always a problem. I remember a few years ago I actually wrote on this topic on Reformation 21, and I had one of the sharpest email responses I think I've received to almost anything I've written. The person wrote to me and basically said, when I essentially said, is it popular because it's true, or is it true because it's popular? And I had a very sharp email from somebody who essentially said, I've always enjoyed reading your stuff, but no more. I'm not going to read you anymore after what you said today. It was insulting. It was a lie. Da-dum-dum. I thought it was a very interesting response, but, I've not seen anything since that time that has really caused me to rethink my position. No. It seems to me that if this is a genuine movement of God, we will see long-term fruit at the level of the church. And I don't mean 60,000 people turning up to a stadium to hear some guy preach. I don't mean 20,000 downloads of a sermon by a particular cool or hip teacher. I mean we will see local churches growing where people are properly connected, they know each other, they watch each other's back, they do each other meals when they're ill. We will actually see the real growth of proper New Testament church life that I think simply can't be achieved in the kind of massive, humongous, as we would say in Britain, humongous churches that seem to be the flagships of this new movement.
Well, and in many ways was not the Protestant Reformation something that was driven along by pastoral needs, a recovery of pastoral ministry, of biblical pastoral ministry and ecclesiology. It wasn't simply a recovery of the understanding of God's sovereignty or a drafting of the doctrines of grace, but these were men, Luther and others, whose passion and zeal was for the church, for the people of God, for the recovery of true pastoral ministry from the abuses of the medieval church. And so would it not follow then that if we were reformed, where we'll see the difference is, as you mentioned, in the local church, faithful men doing the faithful work of the ministry.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I think when you look at the career of somebody like Calvin, what is it that drives Calvin? What is it that makes Calvin controversial in Geneva? By and large, it's pastoral reforms, it's liturgical reforms, it's ecclesiological reforms. These are the things that mean he butts heads with the traditional, old, politically powerful Genevan families. Calvin is really engaged in, I think he would have understood the Reformation as an attempt to purify, to recast worship and church life along New Testament lines. It's not simply a recovery of an anti-Pelagian gospel, not simply a recovery of a gospel based on election. It's the recovery of, I know this phrase can be used to mean things that I don't mean by this, but it's the recovery of a form of life, a form of ecclesiastical life. That's what he was trying to recover. And I just don't see that in the Young, Restless and Reformed. Maybe we're too close to it to see it. But I think we will only be able to see, I had one of the big leaders of this movement once say to me, this is, don't get in our way, this is a movement of God. Yeah. Well, I hope that's the case. And I don't want to get in the way of a movement of God, but I don't think we're really going to be able to tell that until 20, 25 years hence.
Sure. And isn't not also, again, concerning on this, when we have some of the early leaders of the Young Restless Reform movement building bridges with people that we would, I think, rightly consider false teachers.
Yeah.
Men like T.D. Jakes.
Yep.
And others. And there seems to be a fascination now among some of the early pioneers of the Young Restless Reform movement to be dabbling in, of all things, prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
And saying things about the pastoral ministry, saying things about the laypersons in their church, which seem to be harsh and mean-spirited. All of that, I think, begs the question of, is the Young Restless movement truly reformed, or is it something else? And I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. I admire and appreciate, for instance, Kevin DeYoung very much. And one of the things I appreciate about him is he is a churchman, and he's written very, very well and thoughtfully on the church and and these kinds of connections. But broadly speaking, as a movement, I wonder, I have to wonder about how tethered it is to doctrine rather than simply cultural things.
Yeah, and this brings us back to that cool aesthetic.
Right.
That is going to throw up all manner of problems in the medium to long term. First of all, of course, the cool aesthetic is by and large a youth thing.
Right.
It appeals to young people and it appeals to old people who want to pretend to be young people. So, we have the embarrassing sight of 40-something ministers prancing around in torn jeans. Of course, you were wearing them last week. I noticed, Todd, but I assume they tore merely when you bent over, rather than by the designer.
No, I bought them with those tears in them. I paid more for those tears, Carl.
Oh. You've really disrupted my journey at that point, brother. That is not helpful. That is, I don't feel quite as authentic as I did when I came in. The other side of it is that cool, this is something that is going to hit some people very, very hard. Yeah. Cool is an aesthetic determined by the wider culture, not determined by the church. The recent... You'll have to remind me how to pronounce this man's name.
You are wanting to refer, Carl.
I'm going to say Giglio, which I think would be a more accurate pronunciation, but his actual name is...
It's accurate in your mind, and I understand you're European, but his name is Louis Giglio.
Giglio, okay.
The founder of the Passion Movement. And by the way, as we're recording this, it is Inauguration Day as we are recording this. Yeah. And of course,
we haven't got a clue where Mr. Giglio is on.
No, we know that he is not at the inauguration, at least. But the Reverend Giglio, who, and I, just as a disclaimer, and I do like to drop names every once in a while. I know Louis. I haven't spoken to him in around 10 years, but came to know him when I was a senior in high school. He's a good man. He's an honorable man. I learned a lot when I was a senior in high school and my first few years in college from him.
Matt's nodding, so I think we've done enough to cover ourselves on the legal front there, brother.
And I know Billy Graham, of course, as well. But Louis, what's interesting, what we've seen and what you're talking about, is it possible for the church, for evangelicals, for Bible-believing Christians to be cool? Of course, you know the whole debacle with him being invited to say the prayer at the inauguration. Then it was discovered that some 15 years ago he preached a sermon in which he affirmed that homosexuality is indeed a sin. And of course, our cultural despisers rose up and drove him from the inauguration. And
despising us culturally.
Despising
what a surprise.
us culturally.
The Pope is Catholic.
Exactly. And part of what makes this interesting to me is that Louis has done everything right to be accepted by the wider culture, culturally speaking. They do a lot. The whole Passion Movement does a lot for to fight sex trafficking, for instance. But he's finding that the problem is you can do all the right things, but as long as you're still going to believe that what the Bible says about human sexuality is true and that the tomb is empty and that Jesus was born of a virgin, they are never going to accept us. And should we be okay with that?
I think we should be absolutely okay with that. I mean, what strikes me is how upset Christians get.
Right.
You know, you have the secular state despises Christianity, and we're somehow offended by that. It's a little bit like, as I just made an allusion, it'd be like being offended that the Pope is Catholic, or that Chairman Mao is dead, or that Belgium is a small country. I mean, these are all fairly self-evident propositions. Christianity is offensive to the natural man, and that Mr. Giglio has preached something that's offended them. Well, to misquote Churchill, so he's offended somebody. Great, that means that at least once upon a time he believed something enough to offend people with it. What we have to realize is that it doesn't matter how skinny your jeans. It doesn't matter where you position that tear. It doesn't matter what bands you listen to. It doesn't matter where you get your hair cut or what glasses you wear. I was going to say spectacles, but I think that's an English term for them. Probably doesn't work.
It is, and mine are Oakleys. But go ahead.
It doesn't matter how cool you think you are. If you affirm the biblical position on the resurrection, the culture is going to think you're an idiot. If you affirm the biblical position on homosexuality, the culture is very soon going to treat you with the same contempt that it treats a white racist supremacist. And we got to deal with that. That's just the way it is. So this idea that we can somehow impact or transform the culture by mimicking the culture as much as we possibly can, absolute nonsense.
Indeed.
Because too much accommodation will never be enough. Will never be enough.
And I found the response from Louis and his church, I found it to be instructive, actually in a sad sort of way. Because part of the response was, look, this really isn't our bailiwick anymore. This is, the issue of homosexuality is just not something we concern ourselves with anymore. That was from a sermon 15 years ago. Now they're not saying we don't believe it anymore. They're not going to go so far as to say we now deny what the Bible says about human sexuality, because I'm sure that he still very much believes that. But there was almost like an appeal to say, hey, listen, can't we just agree on this thing? I've been a good boy the last 15 years. I haven't brought this up anymore. And of course, that's still not enough. That's still not enough. And at what point are we going to say we give too much when we seek to be accepted so broadly that will be accepted on a platform with the President of the United States?
And this is the homosexual issue because of the power of the lobby. This is the big issue, moral issue of this generation. I anticipate a major evangelical collapse on this within the next 10 or 15 years. There's already seeing signs of that in the United Kingdom. Steve Chalke last week, an influential evangelical pastor, openly shifted on the issue, or at least came out cleanly in favor of monogamous homosexual marriage, doesn't have a problem with it. Interesting enough, Chalke first hit the headlines about a decade ago when he denied penal substitution.
Right.
Well, one could draw a genealogy here and say, well, if you deny penal substitution, you're really reconstructing your doctrine of sin as something that isn't offensive to God, but is, if you like, is relationally problematic among human beings. If you think of sin as primarily something that speaks of problematic relations between human beings, why should you consider homosexuality wrong?
Yeah. Chalke was the one who famously called penal substitution cosmic child abuse.
Yeah, I mean, that's the level of intelligence,
right.
An intelligent theological debate one's engaged in with somebody like that.
Yeah, I agree, by the way, of your assessment that the issue of homosexuality is going to be an issue of collapse for the evangelicals, because we are seeing now, and not just Steve Chalke, we are seeing some men here, prominent evangelicals, who are still they're trying to keep their grip on what the Bible says about human sexuality, but they've flubbed it in recent interviews and public forums, because I guess that's the first stage, is you become embarrassed of the doctrine, you become embarrassed of the truth before you jettison it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we have seen some rather prominent and influential men within the church publicly blush over the Bible's standard of human sexuality.
And one can feel for people in that situation.
Sure.
I mean, I was recently preaching in my church on a Sunday evening, and we had a couple of visitors in the church. I didn't know who they were. My sermon happened to be touching on the historical Adam that night. And I'm standing up there thinking, these people are going to think I'm a nut job.
Yeah.
Because maybe I should leave that bit of my sermon out. Maybe I should nuance it.
Yeah.
Can't do it.
Right.
Can't do it. I want to be liked. I want people to think that I'm an urbane, intelligent person, hard though that is to imagine. You know me, Todd. But this is where it's going to pinch us.
Right.
And if you're into something because it's cool and hip, that's going to vanish like the morning mist.
Absolutely.
When the heat comes.
Right.
If churches in the United States lose their tax-exempt status in the next decade or 15 years, it's quite possible. That's going to impact giving.
Absolutely.
Who's going to keep giving? I have to say, I hope that I would continue to give at the same level, but man, it would hurt.
You bet.
I would really know if I was committed at that point.
Right.
I wonder how many of these mega churches would be able to survive on offerings rather than offshore assets, or however they I'm sure there are probably pastors of offshore investments at some of these churches.
Along with the pastor of arts.
You know, and that's, losing your tax-exempt status, that's not even persecution. That's not being sent to a gulag. That's not being separated from your family. But even that, I suspect, would have a devastating effect on the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're entering very interesting times. And, the birth of the cool just ain't going to cut it at this point.
No. And one of the things that concerns me about the rise of the acceptance, the normalizing of homosexuality, even among Christians, is, for instance, a statistic I just saw recently. The year I graduated from high school, 1985, over 90% of graduating seniors, nationwide, not Christian, but just nationwide, over 90% of graduating seniors identified homosexuality as sinful. And now that's flipped almost completely, where now less than 10% of graduating seniors identify homosexuality as something that is sinful. Well, that includes lots and lots of quote-unquote churched kids.
Yeah.
And I think that what the culture has done to confuse them about their own sexuality and the amount of time they spend in media consumption and whatnot is very harmful, and is going to make a clear message on biblical sexual ethics not only offensive outside of the church, but offensive within our own congregations.
Yeah, and the part of the problem of, as you also touched on there, and maybe this is one for a later podcast, the power of the media. We've not lost the argument.
Right.
We've not lost the argument. We've lost the culture.
Sure.
It's soap operas.
Right.
It's sitcoms. It's these things that send powerful, again, it's an overused word, I know, for me, but they send aesthetic signals.
Right.
That opposition to homosexuality is distasteful.
Correct.
It's not that it's been demonstrated to be wrong, it's just distasteful.
Right.
We all know people who are homosexual. They're nice people. Get on well with them. Wish them no ill.
Right.
But you can't base your moral code, you can't base your understanding of the framework within which sex is meant to occur on whether somebody is, we'd say a decent bloke or not.
Right.
You need something more sophisticated. Sex is too important not to be
Right.
set within a complex philosophical framework to understand its significance. It isn't simply an exchange of bodily fluids.
Right. Right. Well, good discussion, something that clearly anyone in pastoral ministry needs to, I hope, consider, and Christians at large, because we're getting all sorts of advice on how to take the culture back and speak to politicians if they don't honor a conservative evangelical. Well, we just can't expect those things. We shouldn't expect those things. But we ought to have an idea how to answer when we're questioned.
We need to pray, and we need to know what we believe.
Right.
And have reasons for that belief.
Mm-hmm.
That is the key way. And the only way ultimately to influence culture is to see more and more people turning to Christ.
Right.
Which may not happen. That is in the, that is for us to propose, but for the Lord to dispose.
Right. Right. And it won't happen through putting pressure on a president to let one of our guys pray.
No. What happens is, it's like that moment in King of the Hill where the Hank Hill says to the Christian rock band, you're not making Christianity better. You're making rock worse. I think when we dance to the tune of the secular authorities, we don't make them more Christian. We make ourselves more secular.
Indeed. Well, very happy that you were able to join us today for the Mortification of Spin. Hope that it's been helpful for you. We do encourage you to come to the website of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. It's a wonderful ministry. We would encourage you to support the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. They do a lot of wonderful work that is helpful for the church, work that is helpful for pastors, and we commend them to you. So for Carl Trueman and Todd Pruitt, signing off now. Have a wonderful day.